I think we're okay to start. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. As you know, today is the first day of the UK's presidency of the UN Security Council for the month of November. We're looking forward to briefing you today on the UK's priorities and programme of work for the month. Today with us, we have Ambassador Barbara Woodward, UK Permanent Representative to the UN, and Fergus Exley, Minister, Councillor and Political Coordinator for the UK at the UN. We'll start with some opening remarks from the Ambassador, and then we'll move to Q&A. So if you have a question, just wave at me. I'll come to you all in order. And I think we have quite a few people dialing in online because it's a Friday. So my colleague Rosie will be monitoring. So just please drop a line in the chat, and I'll come to you online as well. So without further ado, over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. As you all know, it's been well trailed. The UK assumes the presidency of the UN Security Council from today. As I think you also all know, we try and run efficient and open presidencies, and talking to you today and during the month will be an important part of our work to help you do your very important work on reporting here. And my team is ready to help you throughout the month. I'd like to start by outlining our priorities for the month, and then, of course, we'll open up to questions. Let me start by stating the obvious, but it's still worth stating, I think. We assume the presidency during an exceptionally difficult time. The world is facing more conflict now than at any other point since World War II. And it's worth remembering, and you know this very well from your work, this is not abstract conflict. For millions of people, conflict means suffering, grief, fear. It means a lack of certainty about if they will eat, where they will sleep, whether they will live to the end of the day, whether their children will live to the end of the day. Over 339 million people currently rely on humanitarian aid delivered by the UN and its humanitarian partners just to survive. And all the while, the UN is under enormous pressure from various quarters. But all over the world too, the UN remains in every war zone, in every refugee camp. The UN is a beacon of hope for so many, but in particular, I would say at this time, a beacon of hope for Palestinians, and UNRWA is their irreplaceable lifeline. So this week's Israeli Knesset bills restricting UNRWA's ability to work are totally wrong. Palestinians need the UN, but we all need the UN. So there's no justification for denying civilians access to basic aid, and there is no one but UNRWA that can deliver aid on the enormous scale that is now required in Gaza and the region, and no amount of rhetoric can change that. So I want to reiterate that the UK is committed to supporting the UN, to supporting Palestinians in Gaza and beyond, and we are committed as leading humanitarian donors. Now, turning more specifically to our presidency, as I said, the world is facing more conflict than at any other time since World War II, and our signature events will aim to address that. We'll focus on the three biggest conflicts in the world today, which span three different continents: the devastation and the risk of war in the Middle East, Russia's ongoing violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty in Europe, and the appalling conflict in Sudan. On the Middle East, on the morning of Monday, the 18th of November, we expect the UK's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, to chair a Security Council briefing on the Middle East. The Council has, of course, had many emergency meetings on this, and my Foreign Secretary has been clear. We need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. We need an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah. Further escalation is in no one's interests. No good can come from pouring fuel on the fire of the flames and escalating this cycle of violence. And it is time for all sides in this conflict to draw a line. Ultimately, the only way to secure not just an immediate but also a lasting ceasefire is a two-state solution. And to achieve this, of course, we need to think about what pathway there is to rebuilding Gaza as part of a viable Palestinian state, including East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank, living side by side with a secure and safe Israel. And we need to think about what that looks like. I want to underline that the Palestinian and Israeli people alike have a right to self-determination, safety and security, and achieving that through diplomacy, not war, will be a focus of our UK presidency. Second, on Ukraine, in the afternoon of the 18th of November, so that's the same afternoon, my Foreign Secretary will chair a briefing on Ukraine just ahead of the 1,000th day of the war that week. It may be 2.5 years now since Russia first invaded Ukraine, but our support for Ukraine as it fights to defend its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and the principles of the UN Charter remains ironclad. The international community must never, and we will never, become complacent about such a flagrant violation of the UN Charter. Because Putin will not stop at Ukraine. Just look at the level of chaos and conflict around the world that can be traced back to Russia. Russia has not denied the fact that it's doing deals with North Korea to use North Korean troops as cannon fodder for its disastrous war. 10,000 North Korean troops have already arrived in Russia. Russia is sourcing drones and munition from Iran, funding its sponsorship of terrorism across the Middle East. And as I've said before, we can be sure that Iran and North Korea are exacting a heavy price from Russia for their support. And there are few things that Russia has left to offer that we know North Korea and Iran want. And of course, Russia has already blocked the UN from monitoring North Korea's illegal nuclear and ballistic missile program. So where there is death and chaos, President Putin's hand is rarely far behind. So we will once again be using our presidency to call out Russia's disinformation and expose their crimes. We plan to run a constructive and effective presidency. You would expect nothing less, I think, from a permanent member of the Security Council. Unfortunately, we get less, much less, from Russia. They blocked our programme of work this morning from being adopted on the basis of this Ukraine briefing. We will proceed nonetheless, and my team will share our draft programme of work with you. It's been circulated because there will be no formal version published online. We will also publish daily updates on the programme on our Twitter account. Third, on Sudan, we are, as you know, 19 months in to the war. Both sides are committing egregious human rights violations, including the widespread rape of women and girls. More than half the Sudanese population are experiencing severe food insecurity. Despite this, the SAF and the RSF remain focused on fighting each other and not the famine and suffering facing their country. Even since the Adre border opened in August, fewer than 30 trucks of aid are getting in per week, and that is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of 9 million people suffering in Darfur. The border opening is due to expire on the 16th of November, and we need it to remain open. Indeed, all possible routes for aid, whether they are cross-border or across conflict lines, need to be maximised. If they're not, countless lives will be lost. So this is a priority for us, and on the 12th of November, our Minister for the UN and for Africa, Lord Collins, will focus a briefing on scaling up aid delivery and ensuring greater protection of civilians by all sides, as the Secretary-General has called for. We will be shortly introducing a draft Security Council resolution among Council members to drive forward progress on this. The draft resolution will be based on the Secretary-General's recommendations and will focus on developing a compliance mechanism for the warring parties' commitments they made on the protection of civilians in Jeddah over a year ago in 2023, and ways to support mediation efforts to deliver a ceasefire, even if we start with local ceasefires before moving to a national one. And so then finally, a couple of words on the programme of work. Beyond those three signature events on the Middle East, on Ukraine and on Sudan, we'll have a pretty busy month of regular business as well. Just this afternoon, to give you a heads up, the Council will convene for a debate on Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we expect to adopt a reauthorisation of the mandate for EUFOR, which remains, of course, crucial for peace and security in Bosnia and Herzegovina and to support the implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement. We can talk about other things in the programme as we go through, but as you can see, it's going to be a busy month. We very much look forward to working with you, and thank you for your interest in our work. And I'm now happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll help you moderate the hands of the first question to Edie.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, for doing this briefing, and we hope you will talk to us at the stakeout often.
I will try.
Can you tell us first whether there is any prospect of any council product coming out in this month on the Middle East, Gaza, Ukraine, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, possibly. And secondly, on Sudan, is there also any prospect of any council product, since it is a signature event of your presidency? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edie, for both of those questions and for your kind words. So happily, my answer on all of those is yes, but let me elaborate a bit. So on the Middle East, at the moment, we're very focused on the appalling humanitarian situation, not just in Gaza, but also in particular in Lebanon, but then the displacement of refugees from Lebanon and into Syria. So I know that our E10 colleagues have been looking at that very closely and considering a draft Security Council resolution. We haven't seen that yet, but it's definitely on the stocks and something that they would like to advance. At the same time, we want to give further consideration, as I said in my remarks, to the sort of longer term perspective, the importance of a two-state solution. You'll remember we sort of have been around this, of course, several times. We've had Secretary Blinken's sort of 5 no's. We had a draft from the French much earlier in the year, and we would definitely like to explore if there is scope to look towards something more long-term there as well. So we'll see where we can get to on the back of the resolutions we've already had. I would say that we're very mindful as a council, and certainly as the UK, of our responsibility to drive forward council action in this area, but also to make sure we have products that have meaning on the ground. And I think 2735, with the appointment of Sigrid Kaag, was a good example of that. But of course, the current problems with UNRWA and others are things that we need to address as well. But definitely, products in mind there. And the same on Sudan. We're penholders on Sudan, and on the back of the Secretary-General's report on protection of civilians in particular, we will be circulating, or beginning the process of circulating today, a draft Security Council resolution on Sudan. Obviously, we want to focus on protection of civilians, the humanitarian situation, as I mentioned, with more than 9 million people facing food insecurity, but also what we can do to find a mechanism to draw the warring parties back towards the Jeddah process, to look at where mediation can work, to look at whether we can find ways of local ceasefires leading to national ceasefires. And then, of course, we need to look in particular at keeping the border crossing at Ardre open beyond the 15th of November and actually opening up as much more as we can. So there's quite a lot of material there which we will reflect in our draft council resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Amelie, for the next question.
Thank you, Ambassador. Amélie Bottelier from AFP News Agency. I have two technical questions and one more broad question. First, maybe a stupid one. Since the POW was not adopted, does that mean that there will be a vote at the beginning of every meeting, like it was the case a few months ago? Yes?
Yeah, that we have to do the programme of work at the beginning of every day, I think, don't we, Fergus, or every session?
Yeah, so we will circulate a daily schedule, and then at the beginning of every council meeting, obviously we have to adopt an agenda. It is up to any council member if they want to call a vote in that process. I don't expect they will routinely, but we will work day by day, and we'll post day by day the programme on our website.
Okay. What about, there was, if I'm not mistaken, a request from several countries about a meeting about the new launch from the DPRK yesterday. Mm-hmm. Is it scheduled for next week? Which day?
So, yes, it is scheduled for Monday. Okay. And for obvious reasons, this was an ICBM launch on an unprecedented scale and with all of the implications for regional and international security that we've seen before. So we've moved very quickly to put that in the schedule. And
my last one, sorry, less technical. If I'm not mistaken, you've been working for a while on a product on Myanmar. It's a country you did not mention. How is the work going on that? Do you expect something during your presidency? Thank you.
Thank you. So we are planning to hold a meeting on Myanmar towards the end of the month. We haven't got an exact date for it yet. And what we want to do is to bring the special envoys from ASEAN and the Secretary General's Special Envoy, Julie Bishop, to give the Council a private briefing. And that, I think, will come helpfully on the back of the ASEAN summit, where, as you'll have seen, the communiqué helpfully reinforced the importance of ASEAN and the UN working together. So I think we have perhaps an even clearer mandate in the Security Council now to work with ASEAN on Myanmar. And even if we didn't have that mandate, and you'll all have been following the appalling increase in violence and aggression. So I think August was the most attacks on record, but we've seen aerial bombardment by the military authorities of civilian infrastructure and the continued use of IEDs, in particular in minority ethnic states. The situation in northern Rakhine is, of course, of great concern. So there's quite a lot there that we want to talk about in this meeting and hear from both the special envoys. I saw Julie Bishop myself just last week. At the same time, while I'm catching up on Myanmar, maybe I can just take the liberty to say a bit more about a potential resolution. You'll remember that we tabled one back in September. That would be the follow-up to 2669, which we passed in 2022. We felt that the situation demanded a further iteration of that discussion. It's been, there's, I think, broad consensus in the Council for moving forward with another resolution on Myanmar, but there are one or two countries that have reservations. I very much hope that now we've got a clear statement from ASEAN that we'll be able to move forward with that, because I think we need to accelerate progress there, but I think it will take a little more time to have those discussions of a product. So I don't know when that will come through, but definitely a meeting later in the month on Myanmar. Thank you.
Joe, next question.
Yes, Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. Does the UK support an arms embargo on the sale or transfer of arms to Israel, or either in a national capacity or something that during your presidency you might advance as an idea? during that meeting on the Middle East? And if so, what about Iran, which has transferred drones and ballistic missiles to its terrorist proxies? And one final question on the issue of a two-state solution. Would the UK exclude the possibility of Hamas participating in the governance post-Gaza conflict in such a two-state solution? Thank you.
Thank you. So on the question of an arms embargo to Israel, the UK has a very carefully monitored and transparent programme of arms exports to Israel, but you'll have seen that in September we cut, I think, 30 items from that programme, and Israel responded quite vociferously to that cut in arms exports. Obviously, further action remains under review, but we don't have an arms embargo at the moment, but we have cut our arms exports to Israel bilaterally. On Iran, I mean, obviously Iran is covered by a raft of UN and bilateral sanctions, in particular under the JCPOA. The arms transfers from Iran, in particular to Russia, which are being used on the battlefield in Ukraine, are of great concern to us, partly because they are killing Ukrainians. Last year we brought an exhibition of drone parts that had come from Iran via Russia and had been found on the battlefields of Ukraine to demonstrate the damage that Iran was doing by breaking sanctions and Russia was doing by condoning the breaking of sanctions there. So we're a party, as it were, to arms embargoes under the JCPOA and then 2231 Security Council resolution, which implements all of those. Does that answer your question?
Well, but what are you focused on the, and quite properly so, on the arms transfers relating to Russia, but what about to Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and then was my question about the two-state solution and Hamas's involvement. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it follows that Iran should not be sponsoring all of these armed groups with the export of weapons. So that's also something that we are monitoring very carefully and in various ways. So in the Red Sea, we've been very active with the US, of course, in trying to prevent the Houthis attacking shipping, and also then we've been working closely with Lebanon to support the training of the Lebanese armed forces to try and to support them to enforce 1701 and push Hezbollah back. And then, of course, with Hamas, we've been very active in Gaza on the response to the 7th of October attacks generally. So we're not condoning in any way Iran breaching multiple UN sanctions in terms of arms exports. In terms of the two-state solution, I think there's still a lot of work to do on how the day after will work. I think, broadly what we want to see is a safe and secure Israel living alongside a safe and secure Palestinian state. That will require, I think, a number of steps, probably involving some security guarantees between the US and Saudi, Saudi recognising Israel. Part of that will be Israel recognising a Palestinian state, and then support for the viability of a Palestinian state. And we have been actively supporting the new Palestinian government under Mustafa in order to try and help move that forward. But at the moment, as we all know, progress has been very limited, and what we very much hope for is that the ceasefire talks, which are still underway, will bear fruit and we can find some space there. Thank you.
Ambassador Michelle, next question.
Thanks, Ambassador. On North Korea, the Council met this week over North Korean troops in Russia. You'll meet on Monday over the recent ICBM test. There's strong warnings about another nuclear test. Do you have any hope that there can be a return to unity on the Council on this issue, or has the Council effectively become irrelevant due to opposition by a couple of members? And then it's the US election on Tuesday. How has that weighed over the work of the Council?
Thank you. We've I think the latest development with Russia securing North Korean troops for its war in Ukraine has taken Russia-North Korean cooperation to a new low. We have known for a while that the North Koreans were supplying military hardware to the Russians, but 10,000 troops who are just going into the Ukrainian front lines to be used as cannon fodder by the Russians takes us to a new low. I don't think the Council has become irrelevant. We did our best earlier in the week to discuss it, and of course we're coming back to North Korea's ballistic missile launch on Monday. So we've very much got the situation in our crosshairs. But I think you're right, particularly this new comprehensive agreement signed between Putin and Kim during Putin's visit to North Korea earlier this year has disabled the Council quite significantly on this agenda, because we've got a permanent member in effect in breach of multiple Security Council resolutions, breaching sanctions and pulling the North Koreans into a war well outside their own continent. So yes, we are definitely we're definitely hamstrung from taking further action. But the fact that we are able to have a debate at all, I think, is testament to the strength of feeling across the Council of the importance of addressing the way in which Russia is instrumentalising North Korea, but the way in which North Korea has for so long been breaking international law and sanctions.
And the US election, how's that weighed on the Council vote?
So I think this has been a year of elections around the world, of which the US election has been highly significant, and we're watching it. But I can't really comment on the US election. The UK has had a long-standing special relationship with the US, and we will work with whoever the American people elect to go into the White House, and that long-standing special relationship has not ever been dependent on one party or other on either side. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic Daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have two questions, Madam President. First, on Karim Khan and the allegations against him with England support, his effort to issue arrest warrant for Israeli war criminals. But my second question, Madam Ambassador, President, about your speeches in the Security Council. You normally start with October 7. If any country in the world knows the history of the conflict, is your country. Tomorrow, November 2nd, is the 107th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which helped create this monstrous country called Israel. Now, you know the history. You know what happened in 1929. You know what happened, the Bill Commission, 1939, the White Paper. Now, why you don't just go to that history and put October 7 in context? As you know that Gaza has been under siege for 17 years. It has been attacked 4 times. Occupation had been there for 57 years. And yet you start October 7 and the terrorist attack of Hamas. Why? Thank you.
So thank you for both of those questions. On the ICC, we support the independence of the ICC, and so those decisions, and we also uphold those decisions. So that would be entirely for the prosecutor of the ICC to follow up, and then we would follow up accordingly. On the Middle East, I recognise that there is a very long history. My interventions in the Council are usually 3 or 3.5 minutes, and I think we have to focus on the particular issue of the day, of course taking into account the history of any situation. But that's why we start with the 7th of October. After the 7th of October, we had, I think, over 100 Security Council meetings in the 6 months following, when we normally have sort of quarterly debates on the Middle East. So I think it's important that we focus on the situation at hand and try to, as we have been consistently, secure a ceasefire, get humanitarian aid in, secure the release of the hostages, and move towards a long-term political sustainable settlement. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. Maggie, your next question.
Thank you, Ambassador. Back here. It's Margaret, VOA. At the last Sudan meeting, the ambassador, to my ears, signaled that he would not be, his government would not be renewing Padre. I don't know if you got the same impression, but if you did, have you spoken to him about it? And what would the implications be, I guess, if they don't renew it? And I understand that the Sanctions Committee on Sudan was supposed to lift, the Russians were going to lift their objections to the 2 RSF commanders being sanctioned. It was supposed to be imminent this week. I don't know if it's happened. I don't see anything on the website, but if you have any information on that. Thank you.
So on ADRE, we are doing all we can between now and the 16th of November when it expires in order to ensure that ADRE can remain open. As I said earlier, the volume of trucks going through at 30 a day is woefully below what the 9 million people in Sudan desperately need in terms of aid. We'd like to see more crossing points opened. If ADRE is closed again, the humanitarian situation in Sudan will get even worse, and that will, of course, include the displacement pressure across the border. So we know from Sudan and from so many other conflicts what happens when aid crossing points are closed. So we'll work to try and ensure that it doesn't. I'm afraid I don't have any more on the Sanctions Committee, but Fergus does.
So there's a bit more process going on. The committee's reviewing some technical changes, but that process is underway, and we hope it will conclude very soon.
Yeah, Pam, next question.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Ambassador, and we're looking forward to the month. It should be busy, or at least it will be busy. So 2 quick follow-ups and then a question. Will your Foreign Secretary on the 18th be at both the morning meeting of the Middle East and the afternoon Ukraine?
Yes.
Second, just quick follow-up, and I think you'll be able to answer this. It's highly unusual for a permanent member to say no to a program of work. So if it comes to a vote on the Ukraine meeting, just to be clear, it's a procedural vote, and therefore no vetoes, and therefore you need 9 votes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now here's the question, which is on 1701. It's been in the breach on both sides for many years. How do you, if that's the goal after some kind of a settlement on Lebanon, how do you enforce it to its core requirements? Thank you.
Thank you. So can I just pick up on both of those points? So yes, absolutely yes, my Foreign Secretary will be at both meetings, and that's an indication of the importance he attaches to both subjects. I would say, by way of context, it is a crazy month for international meetings between, there's a Foreign Affairs Committee, a European one, that day, which will draw some people away. There's also, of course, COP and the G20. So this was really the only day he could make, and he really wanted to do it. So that's why we've packed 2 important meetings into one day. And you're absolutely right on the procedural point. We've been there a lot. We were there this time last year. So, but on 1701, I think the enforcement is, of course, UNIFIL. Sorry, UNIFIL plays a really important role, and we continue to support them and really salute their courage right now, because they are coming under direct attack in ways that they shouldn't at all. But also, we have a long-standing programme of supporting the Lebanese armed forces, who would then provide the buffer support for that. I think this has been going on for a while. We've trained about 34,000, I think, Lebanese armed forces. There's a way to go. I think it would be unfair to place a burden of being able to implement 1701 on them directly. And there's also, I think, scope for Lebanon to sort out a presidency and some of the internal governance which would support implementing 1701. But I don't know whether you want to add anything to that, Fergus.
No, I mean, obviously there's talks underway in the region, as you know. Our Foreign Secretary has been very clear that he feels there needs to be a ceasefire now in Lebanon. We will obviously support any diplomatic process, and a key part of that, of course, will be the full implementation of 1701, as you say, and the elements the Ambassador mentioned are the ways we can contribute to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Marianne, you have the next question.
Thanks, Hannah. Ambassador Woodward, considering the Islamic Republic of Iran Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's recent directive for his commander to prepare for retaliation against Israel following the Israeli airstrike on the military sites, what is
what measures is United Kingdom is taking to kind of to prevent further conflict in the region. Also, one question on Afghanistan. As you know, today, Richard Bennett, the Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan, published his new report on human rights in Afghanistan. The situation on women's rights is deteriorating further, and is the Security Council going to have any thing planned regarding situation in Afghanistan? And also, he asked the international community to work together and pay more attention on Afghanistan, because right now all the attention is on Gaza and then Lebanon and then Ukraine. What is going to happen on issues of Afghanistan, especially women? If you can add to that, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for both of those questions. And you're right, this question of the aggression between Israel and Iran and this retaliatory measures. So on earlier this week, my Foreign Secretary spoke both to Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi but also Prime Minister Netanyahu in order to encourage both Iran and Israel to de-escalate, to get out of this retaliatory cycle and to move towards something that was a more long-term, sustainable ceasefire. So we are working very hard, and I know that international partners are doing the same thing, but my Foreign Secretary is very directly involved, speaking to both Iran and Israel on that. On Afghanistan, thank you for raising it, because as you say, we've mentioned the Middle East, we've mentioned Ukraine, we've mentioned Sudan, but the suffering in Afghanistan, particularly for women and girls, is terrible. And we've seen, obviously, not only the recent virtue and vice law, but then just recently the additional one that bans women from speaking out in public and reading the Quran. So what women are suffering, in addition to being deprived of careers and education, really weighs on, I think, all of our consciences. I was very glad to participate last month in a meeting that we jointly organised with the Canadians. As some of you will know, I'm a co-chair of the Group of Friends of Women of Afghanistan here in New York, and with the Canadians, so the chair of the Group of Friends of Afghanistan in New York. We had a very inspiring briefing from Malala, as well as two Afghan activists talking about what we could do. Frankly, the room for manoeuvre is very limited, because we need to continue to support the people of Afghanistan, and we are trying to use women where possible to deliver humanitarian aid where the UN can get it in, but we're not willing to compromise with the Taliban on the restrictions they're placing on women and girls. So it's a very difficult situation to manage. But anyway, Malala was, I thought, inspiring and steely at the same time, and reminded us of her experience with the Taliban, of course, being shot and nearly killed by the Pakistan Taliban. She said they won't change. So I do think we need to continue to work to find a way to get Afghan women back into the picture, but it is very difficult indeed. We see the Secretary-General's Special Rapporteur, Rosa Otunbayeva, regularly, but there's really not much progress to report, I'm afraid.
What do you say about the gender apartheid campaign? Does UK support that?
The gender apartheid campaign. Yeah, we talked about that a bit when Malala was here. And what worries me about the gender apartheid campaign, if I can be very frank, is that I think we risk getting involved in a debate about apartheid and gender apartheid, while real women and real girls in Afghanistan are not getting enough to eat, they're not getting education, and they're not getting a chance to work. So I think it's a very valid debate to have, but it worries me that the international community will go down this sort of ideological debate rather than focusing on what we can do for women and girls in Afghanistan right now.
Thank you, Ambassador. Sharif, the next question.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. I'm Sharifa Chitin from Anadolu Agency. For the last 2 weeks, UN special rapporteurs have been briefing us and have been briefing your delegations as well, and they've been warning against the destruction that is taking place in Gaza, and many of them have actually called it a genocide. And we also have the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice regarding the developments in Gaza. And I know you have mentioned that the 2nd of September, the UK suspended 30 licenses to Israel, but Israel was not the only one criticizing this decision. Others have actually argued that this was a rather limited response. So in your national capacity, considering that there's growing consensus that what is occurring in Gaza is a genocide, do you think this suspension is sufficient, or do you think your government will move on and take additional measures in that context? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you again for raising the situation in Gaza. I mean, I should emphasise, as we all know, more than 43,000 people have been killed already. The number of people displaced, and by displaced we don't mean just displaced once, battered up to the north, brought down to the south, sent somewhere else, sheltering in a tent that was then bombed by the IDF, sheltering in a school that had become a shelter that was then bombed. So the humanitarian situation in Gaza is truly appalling and is the focus of our daily efforts, and we are increasing our funding of aid. We have deplored the Knesset bills on UNRWA, which is the backbone, as I said earlier, of delivering aid into Gaza. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we need to focus on the humanitarian situation. The provisions we took to suspend arms exports to Israel were part of a larger picture in that. So we have increased our humanitarian aid. My foreign minister has been speaking to the very highest levels of the Israeli authorities about the importance of getting aid into Gaza. And as my Prime Minister said just last week, there are no more excuses for not getting aid into Gaza. So we're taking, I would say, a very robust line on the importance of doing that and then moving to a ceasefire and getting the hostages out and finding the political space. Does that answer your question?
Well, actually, I specifically asked if you would be thinking about extending the licenses, the export of weapons to Israel.
So I think my foreign minister said when we put the export bans in place on the 30 that we have, I think there's about 350 altogether, that any further measures would be up for consideration. So we don't have anything under active consideration, but we certainly haven't ruled it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ibtisam.
Thank you. Here.
Hi, sorry.
My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. I have two questions. One on issue of our embargo, but to Sudan. We know that the UN Security Council resolution on Darfur, etc. But would the UK also support full our embargo to in all of Sudan for parties to the conflict? And if yes, then would you work on a resolution or not? And then the other issue is on the occupied Palestinian territory and the West Bank. You constantly talk at the Security Council about your opposition to settlements and the building of settlements. But the question is, which steps are you actually taking to stop that? Because just talking at the Security Council, we know that it's not really helping, unfortunately. So can you point out to specific steps that your government is taking to do that? And then a second question on Gaza. We know that there are many dual citizens fighting in the Israeli army in Gaza too, and some of them may be involved in war crimes. When it comes to UK citizens, is the UK going to take any steps against citizens who are involved also in the Israeli army or maybe in committing war crimes there? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. So starting with Sudan, it's quite clear that a major part of the problem is that both parties are being supplied with weapons from external sources. And in the last Security Council resolution we passed, we were clear that weapons supply and the involvement of external parties needed to stop, and we will continue to press that point very hard indeed. On the West Bank, thank you for picking that up, because I think it's an area where the horror of what is going on in Gaza sometimes eclipses our attention on both the humanitarian but also the political importance of the West Bank. So yes, I do call out illegal settlement expansion and some of the violence that has gone with that. It's been at unprecedented levels recently. I know it's just calling it out in the Security Council. I don't think it's entirely nugatory, so I'm just going to question that. But more importantly, yes, we have followed that up with measures. We have sanctioned individuals who are known to be involved in the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. And I can get you some more details on that if that would be helpful, but we've placed sanctions on them. In terms of dual citizens fighting and committing war crimes, I think we would always be very robust in prosecuting war crimes, whoever they were committed by. So I don't have a specific answer. We haven't got to that point yet, but I think we have a strong record of prosecuting for war crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. My name is Volodymyr Chenko, National News Agency of Ukraine. I also have a question for you as a representative of the United Kingdom. What do you think about at least 2 points of President Zelensky's victory plan, Ukraine's accession to NATO, and the authorization of the use of long-range Western weapons against military targets in Russia? Thank you.
Thank you. And let me say right from the outset that our support for Ukraine is ironclad for as long as it takes. And that's not just language, that translates into nearly $4 billion per year of support for Ukraine. So I think President Zelensky's victory plan is a very important development. It's important because I think it demonstrates that Ukraine is not only able to fight for its survival, but also to see a way through for peace. So on both the question of NATO membership and long-range weapons, we have been supportive. Obviously, NATO is a membership organisation, and we need to work out what Ukraine's pathway is towards membership of NATO, and that I know was discussed at the last NATO summit, and we need to continue to give Ukraine an important way forward on that, as well as, of course, its towards membership of the EU, and those two are sort of slightly linked. In terms of long-range weapons, the UK, as I say, has been very proud to be the largest contributor in Europe of weapons for Ukraine. I think how Ukraine uses them is broadly up to Ukraine, but I think it's important that we don't do two things: that we don't actually have detailed technical discussions about the way in which the UK is able to support Ukraine, because I think that just plays into Putin's hands. If he knows the sort of weapons we're being supplied and whether or not and how they're going to be used, I think that's actually putting Ukraine's security at risk. But I know that discussions go on all the time between our experts about what we can supply and how it could best support Ukraine in its fight for its territorial integrity and sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Conscious of time, so we'll take one more from the room, and then I think we have one remotely.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York, Ital Press. I have a follow-up at 2 questions. One follow-up is on Lebanon 1701. Do you think the rules of engagement are fine the way they are, or they should be changed? Then I have a question. We had here Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, and she proposed a suspension of Israel, and she also had a report just out. So I would like to know your national capacity, what you think. And then as a president of the Security Council, do you think that all resolutions are binding or not? That's very important, but we find out a few months ago that maybe they are not.
Yes.
And then, just allow me, for me, was actually it's very important to me, but are you watching the Netflix series, The Diplomat? And do you...
You think I should be learning something?
What do you think we, as a journalist, if there is anything that we can learn from that series?
Okay. On Lebanon 1701, on the rules of engagement, I mean, that was, of course, the Security Council resolution that was agreed after the last conflict. So it may well be that we would need some sort of update. But at the moment, we are very much looking at 1701 as the broad basis for what could happen after a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. So I think at the moment that looks as if it's broadly right, both geographically and in terms of the excellent work that UNIFIL is doing. But of course, we'll need to update it in the light of a ceasefire. In terms of Francesca Albanese's report, let me be clear, we're not, bilaterally as the UK, we're not considering suspending Israel. And to be honest, to carry on the bilateral point, I don't think it would be a constructive thing to do. I think we all know that at the end, wars are solved by diplomacy, and being able to talk, including here in New York at the UN, is really important. And then on the question of binding resolutions, I remember the discussions that we had. Yes, we consider Security Council resolutions are binding. There's obviously differences between Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 resolutions, but we do not pass resolutions in order for them to be honoured in the breach more than the observance, although we recognise that that is often, sadly, the case. And I'm afraid, would that I had time to watch The Diplomat. I will try and make time and come back to you on that, but I'm afraid I don't have any tips based on that. I'm very sorry.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think we have time for one more question remotely from Iftikhar online. If you can unmute.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. This is Iftikhar Ali from Associated Press of Pakistan. My question on Afghanistan has been asked, but I wanted to draw your attention to today's terrorist attack in Pakistan's Balochistan province, in which five schoolgirls were killed. These attacks, as you know, are being carried out by terrorist groups which are based in Afghanistan, and they carry these cross-border attacks. This Afghanistan Taliban government is allowing these terrorist groups to operate from their soil, despite their promises to the international community. Would you have any comment on that?
Well, thank you for your question, and let me say before I answer it that we're very much looking forward to working with Pakistan on the Security Council from the 1st of January. So that will be an important opportunity. And I know that one of the aims of Pakistan joining the Security Council will be a counter-terrorism brief. So on the specific attack, let me say first of all, my condolences and sympathies to those who have been bereaved and in this attack, because there is nothing that can ever bring back a lost life caused by a terrorist attack. So my condolences to those involved. I do think that there's obviously been a lot of discussion between Pakistan and Afghanistan about this border terrorism, including, of course, the decision earlier this year to send back a number of Afghan refugees to Afghanistan from Pakistan. But I do think terrorism remains a scourge of our society, sadly, it's a transnational problem, and we very much look forward to continuing our bilateral cooperation with Pakistan on working together to help counter terrorism. And of course, we'll look at it here in the UN context as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We are out of time, but I'll just take one final question from the room.
Okay, my name is Sylviane Zahir. Good afternoon, Madam President. From Lorient Le Jour, Beirut. I was wondering if 1559 resolution is still on the table, because sometimes you hear now and there, even the leaders they are not ready to apply it, implement it. Can you please give us some thought from what you expect to confirm it?
Well, I would say, I mean, resolutions are always on the table, and we were talking earlier about whether they were binding or not. Obviously, the situation in Lebanon at the moment is not conducive to implementing 1559. But in all of our discussions, and I know in my foreign minister's discussions with Prime Minister McCarthy, there has been a discussion of how to support Lebanon in the future. So we very much hope that we can come back to implementing that sooner rather than later if we can secure a ceasefire and then put 1701 or something like it, a successor in place, and then come back to 1559. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, everyone, for your time. That's it.